Okay, my name is Lamonte Solomon, and this is Screencast number 2, where we're going to be talking about Tullahoma versus Doe and Endrew versus Douglas County. All right, so some similarities between both of these cases. They are dealing with parents who are relocating their students who deal with needing special needs and attempting to have the school district reimburse their expenses. All right. So, as we get started, there are two things we need to know. We need to know what Individual versus Disability Act is. So, a brief description. If a free public school cannot meet the educational needs of a disabled student, the student's parents may enroll their child in a private school and seek reimbursement for tuition and related expenses. So, idea is basically a parental right, all right, to make sure their student receives the appropriate tools to be successful. All right. The next thing we need to know is free appropriate public education. That's making sure that an adequate plan of assessing the standard of accessing the standard. So this is like an IEP for the student to make sure that they are capable of getting access into what is being taught and that they're able to thrive in that information, not just reach it. So, with Tullahoma versus Doe, we have a parent that is pushing for special educational service to maximize her students' capabilities. She requested that her student get tested, and that her student she requested that her student gets tested, and the student appeared to have a disability, but at the same time still have a high IQ. So that parent found a private school and transferred the student to that private school. And they had the idea that it's the state's responsibility for special education to impose a higher standard. So she found a private school that specifically segregates students with disabilities, in which the courts deemed that her student didn't really need. The school provided an IEP that was deemed appropriate, but due to the parent transferring the student to that private school, they basically said that they did not give the IEP a chance to succeed. They didn't test it out. I think it was kind of weird that they did a Chevrolet versus Cadillac comparison. They did a Chevy to Cadillac comparison, where the Cadillac is the public schools plan for special needs students to reach. It's like something basic, whereas the private school that they were trying to get their student in was the Cadillac. It was kind of overdoing it, but it was still, both are still getting the student where they need to be, but they just wanted something better. That's what they kind of deemed it as. But they ultimately rejected giving that parent a reimbursement, and they were responsible for all the expenses. So some of the key takeaways that I got from this was, it is a responsibility for public schools to provide support to students with IEPs. They have to be intentional about making sure that the students can access information, access the standards, not necessarily to excel in them, but at least reach them. Another takeaway is that parents have the right to have their students tested to see if they have any disabilities, and also educators do as well. So if an educator sees that a student may have a disability, they can request that, hey, this student may need to be tested for an IEP. And the last takeaway is that IEPs can be argued substantial. So you can't just say this IEP isn't good enough or it isn't impactful. You have to give it a chance. You have to say that it's appropriate, it's laid out well. depending on how that IEP is laid out, and also if you have enough time, you can use that in your favor or it can not be in your favor. Leading us to the next case. So with Endrew versus Douglas County, now this one has a lot more information because this one was a longer process. So you had a student that was receiving a repeated IEP that was resulting in no progress. So the parent relocated their student to a private school for students with autism. So at that school for student with autism, the student made substantial progress in educational achievement and adaptive skills. So seeing that difference between we're doing this same IEP repeatedly year after year and nothing is improving. My student isn't improving. Relocating and now my student is thriving. So after that experience, the parent sought reimbursement but was rejected at first by the 10th Circuit Court. After that, with that, they said the IEP offered was appropriate, enabling the student to make progress merely more than the minimals. So basically saying that your student was able to at least reach it a little bit to meet their goal, just to be right there at the cuffs. So that parent did not stop there. They took it to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court said that basically meeting the bare minimum is not right. So the Supreme Court set a new standard that schools must offer an IEP reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. So from the Supreme Court level, they still expect public schools to provide an IEP that results in substantial progress, regardless of the child's circumstance, disability, etc. So based off of that ruling, the district court ordered that, the Supreme Court ruled that the district court reimburses the family. And the school district agreed to pay the family $1.32 million for the private school tuition, related expenses, and legal fees. So my key takeaway from this is IEPs are very important. Caring for your students is very important, regardless of if they have IEPs, disabilities, or not. So something that stood out to me was Hamilton County Schools' mission statement: to equip students with the knowledge, skills, and supports to thrive in life. So not just to meet the bare minimum, but to thrive, reach the standard, reach the expectation, and also still be capable to go above. So IEPs are very important. We have to make sure that students are receiving their fair share of support and also push them beyond their limits. Challenge them and try to push them beyond the limits that we think they may have.